We are excited to be partnering with Transact and CSCMP to deliver a what, when, and how situation with dealing with your board. Knit League has been around since 1907, a trade association representing the voice of the shipper. We represent them by rail, ocean, and highway. The League has a swath of commodities and businesses. Most of them are dependent on a healthy, viable, reliable freight and ocean and rail network. Our members are manufacturers, transporters, agricultural, aggregates, chemicals, steel, forest products, fuels, and feed. Knit League members spend billions of dollars annually and employ millions of people. We look forward to a wonderful session here, and I'm going to turn it over to Mark Baxa with CSCMP.
Well, thank you very much, Nancy, and welcome everybody. We're very glad you're here. On behalf of CSCMP and our Transportation Center of Excellence, we're glad to bring great content as authored by this very group here today, which is both insightful and extremely timely and certainly impactful. CSCMP is celebrating its 60th year this year, and we rest on the shoulders of those that had a great vision to create an organization that would sustain professionals around the world throughout their career and create amazing networks. We're an association of approximately 10,000 members around the world and growing, and we exist as a thoroughfare of continuous learning and education so that supply chains can improve their competency and capability. And no time is any better than the present than to host webinars like this under our Transportation Center of Excellence in collaboration with great members such as Mike Reagan from Transact, and we appreciate Mike's lab and his studio for sponsoring this program and the slew of speakers that you see here today. We're very excited to be a part of this and wish you great learning today. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Mike Reagan. Mike?
Folks, good morning, and thank you very much, Nancy and Mark, and we are thrilled that you're all joining us. We have a bunch of people that have signed up, and I want to just very briefly ask a question to get things started. And that question is this: how important is your career? Now, you may be thinking, Mike, is that like a rhetorical question? Well, the reason I'm asking that is because for numerous years, I've given a lot of different presentations, many of which have come at CSCMP's annual conference and the Knit League, et cetera, that have been oriented around career issues. And over the years at transact.com, I've featured some interviews with some of the really knowledgeable people in the area of career building. A good friend of mine, John Challenger, is the CEO of one of the largest executive outplacement services. And some of my other friends have worked with major retainer recruiting firms such as Russell Reynolds and firms like that. And when we talk to them about careers, if I were to ask everyone on this call, what do you think are the top issues and things that affect your career? If you were really committed to having a great career, what would be the top 2 or 3 things that you'd want to really focus on? And as you're thinking about that, let me help you out. Because according to people like John, another buddy of mine at Russell Reynolds and other firms, one of the top 2 issues that people, professionals at the level that we have on this call have to address is their ability to communicate upward within the organization. And I'll just briefly touch on this because the more I talk, the less you'll have hear from our audience and our resources, and they've got just some fantastic things to say. But one of the things that we are going to be addressing is to look at what to say when that call comes from your C-level executives, your board member, or the person to whom you report. First thing you need to ask is, what will I say? The second thing that you need to ask is, how will I say it? And I've given lots of different presentations, whether it's at the associations or universities. And one of the things that I think frustrates people is that they're not getting through to the person to whom they're communicating. And the reason for that is they're not speaking the same language. For you to assume that your CFO speaks the same language as your vice president of sales or your head of procurement or your IT, et cetera, is not realistic. And that's why you have to focus on how to say it. And the third thing is when to say it. And that is extremely important because, like they say, timing is everything. Now, I want to say thank you, a shout out to Kevin Smith and heading up the Center of Operational Excellence. Kevin has had a wonderful background at CVS and all. But one of the things that we were kicking around when we were talking about webcast came from some of the people on this call. Bruce Ridley, I had the pleasure of serving with Bruce when he was the chairman of the board of Knit League. We're on the Knit League board together. Bruce sent me a presentation a while back saying, Mike, I thought you'd be interested about what we had to do as we prepared for a presentation that we had to make for the board. John Jansen, back in the summer, called me up. He sounded a little bit stressed out. And he said, Mike, normally I get 10 minutes with the board. Tomorrow, I'm going to have an hour and a half. Peter Burke, we've known each other a long time at Landefrost. Peter routinely goes before the board, and Kevin, as well at CVS, made many presentations. Mark as well, in his capacity prior to CSCMP. But some of you may be saying, Mike, I'm not going to be communicating with the board. I have to communicate with my vice president of finance. I have to communicate. So with that thought in mind, I'm thinking that maybe what we're looking at here isn't just the board, because some of you are saying, I'll never have to communicate with my board, but you will definitely have to explain to the people above you. And let me give you one closing thought, if I might. Part of the reason I'm so passionate about this is I had the opportunity and privilege to chair a network within the Young Presidents Organization, the Manufacturing Excellence Network, with about 4,000 plus members. And I had an interesting call from a CEO in October, and he said, Mike, let me explain to you my world. Prior to COVID, I was spending about 2 to 3% of my time in the supply chain area. Today, I'm spending 70 to 75% of my time in the supply chain area. And though the crisis has passed from 2021 and 2022, a lot of people have woken up to the fact that supply chain issues are exceptionally important. So with that thought in mind, I'm going to turn it over and ask each one of the resources we call you on you, if you could give a little brief explanation of what you do, your company, and this type of thing. And then some of the thoughts that you've had, take a minute and we'll circle back then talking about specific communications. So John Jansen, if you can go forward and explain what Sanmar does, I'd appreciate it, and your role there.
Sure. John Jansen, Vice President of our Global Logistics for Sanmar. And Sanmar is the nation's largest wholesale distributor of apparel to the promotional industry. We manufacture in 25 countries around the world. We're a top 75 US importer, and we're a significant small parcel LTL shipper within the United States. And Mike, really happy to be here today.
Delighted. Peter, if you can share a little bit about your background.
Sure. Good morning, and thanks for having me. I'm a Senior Vice President of Operations for Landefrost. We are privately held, and we are the third largest lunch meat maker in the U.S. We provide to grocery retail. We do have a fleet of 60 plus reefer units, and we do use outside carriers as well.
Great. Bruce, if you can enlighten us there about Packaging Corporation and your role.
Yes, good morning, everybody. It's Bruce Ridley, and I'm a Senior Vice President over Environmental Health and Safety and Transportation. Packaging Corporation of America, we make empty boxes, Mike. And also we have some printing papers up in I Falls. So we have 8 paper mills and 95 box plants, and we're in charge of transporting paper out of the mills and out of the box plants to all of our customers.
Lots and lots of empty boxes you guys produce. So and Kevin, if you could help explain your role and some of the things you've been doing.
Well, thank you, Mike. Thanks for having us here today, too. By the way, I'm the president of Sustainable Supply Chain Consulting, and we focus mostly on organizational design, supply chain resilience, supply chain transformation. And I work with CPG companies, pharma companies, professional organizations, and government agencies primarily.
Great. And your role, too, if you could also explain your role there at CVS, I think that'd be helpful.
Okay, at CVS, I was the Senior Vice President, Supply Chain and Logistics, and also the Chief Sustainability Officer for CVS Caremark.
Great. And Mark, I know you've already spoken, but if you could give it a little bit of background prior to running CSCMP, some of the things you were up to.
Well, I served along with Kevin on the executive board of directors and chaired the organization in 2019 and been a part of CSCMP for about 23 years. Prior to that, I enjoyed a career of about 37 years in corporate America, mostly predominantly with the Upjohn Company, Empresas La Moderna out of Mexico, and then finally the last 23 years with Monsanto, just ahead of the Bayer acquisition. And my roles covered everything from the commercial side of the business all the way through logistics, international trading compliance, and vice president of strategic sourcing and supplier relationship management. And I also covered sustainability and also the diversity inclusion aspects of the supply chain and really supply chain training. So a very diverse background, and it's a pleasure again to bring that to not only CSCMP, but to this group here today, Mike.
Okay, so let's dive right in, and I'm going to start with you, John. You know, one of the things that I mentioned in the intro was the call that you made to me in July. And if you could kind of walk through not just going before the board, but some of the things that you've done throughout your career to build a relationship, I'd appreciate that. Walk us through some key things that you've focused on.
Sure, Mike. And I think that you stated early on, real important, supply chain has been so much in the news, and it's become something, a key focus that our senior executives are always wanting to know about. And so I got the opportunity to present to the leadership team. And really, my goal was to go in and talk to them about first, what happened last year by industry, by ocean, by parcel, by trucking, by dray, and then take them through what we expect to happen this year and how that's going to impact us. And finally, what we're going to do about it and what some of my asks might be coming to them over the next several months as we were going to be facing what we knew was going to be turbulent ocean, dray, and domestic situations. So, and really throughout the year, my goal is to try to make sure there's no surprises. And so I send at least once, usually a weekly update to my boss, who's at our C level, and giving him a quick hit on what's going on in the industry and specifically what could or is affecting SanMar.
You know, just out of curiosity, for those of you that are on the call, in the chat function, we've got my team monitoring that. Just out of curiosity, how many of you can go to chat and just type in yes or no. Do you send out a weekly, quarterly, semi-annual, you name it? Do you send out any update to the people above you explaining what's going on in the market? Can you just, folks out there, while we're going to go on, just type yes or no about that? We just kind of like to get a sense. So if you go to chat, you can put in yes or no, and look forward to seeing what the answers are. While they're doing that, Peter, walk us through some of the things you do at Land Frost, because you have a very close working relationship with the CEO, and some of the tips that you could suggest to people to get them in sync with what you're doing.
Yeah, one is, I would say, since all of our costs impact the bottom line, you have to understand how it impacts profitability by using, simple metrics, whether it's cost of sales or how it impacts COGS, and making sure that you're aligned with your finance department. So, specifically with the CFO. As John said, you don't want any surprises. The past, several years have been very challenging from a labor standpoint, as well as a transportation standpoint. So you want to make sure that you're giving insight as to the trends. The other thing is you want to make sure that you're reviewing this periodically. So it shouldn't be a surprise. I do give weekly updates as well as quarterly updates to the board. So we use, the same metrics as well as we give trending information.
Okay, Peter, one of the things that, that update there, did you say your board gets the updates as well?
Not weekly, but quarterly. And, over the course of the past, 3 years, before it was about, sales and marketing and how we're growing. But over the course of the past 3 years, it's been about COVID, it's been about labor, and it's been about, supply chain in general. So everyone's very familiar with, supply chain. And, the big thing that I'm trying to do is understand disruptors, what's going to happen in the future, and make sure that we've got contingency plans, whether it's on the supply side, and that's everything from labor to raw material, or if it's excessive demand, which is going to outstrip our capacity. That's what they want to know. What are our plans to combat those things?
Okay. Bruce, if you could come off mute there and talk about, Bruce and I have spoken at places like the FTR conference and things like that. The things that you do, and also what makes this, I think the group would love to hear about the fact that you have a weekly meeting with your CEO. If you could walk us through the communications process and, the board experience, take it away.
Sure, Mike. Yeah, so we were very fortunate way back, even before the pandemic. Our CEO meets and continually meets today every Monday at 2 o'clock with the supply chain management people. There's about a half a dozen of us. Really just kind of bring them up to speed with what's going on. And as was mentioned, roadblocks that might be out in front of us, either long-term or short-term. And also I send them a text every morning and kind of let them know if there's any issues out there. So very fortunate to have him and the CFO engaged into what's going on. So to your point, that makes the going to the board much easier when you have to go in and ask for some CapEx, especially large quantities of it, that they already have a lot of trust in the team that you have put together, and that you're going to use the CapEx accordingly. So I think that communication sets the stage for other things that might happen.
Okay. Kevin, walk us through, because on our pre-webcast call, you had brought up some really important points that I briefly alluded to in the intro, but give us a little bit of your experience and wisdom on this.
Okay, I don't know if it's wisdom, but I'll give you my experience. Based on a couple of things you said at the beginning, Mike, I think you're absolutely right. This is a career question, and the three things that came to mind for me were integrity, credibility, and communication. And you have to have, whenever you're going to go to the board, you're going to the CEO, your reputation has to precede you. They have to believe that what you're going to tell them is true. Now, if you go into the board, and when I have done this in the past, I mean, you're going in for one of three reasons. You're either going in to explain an issue, which is usually the most volatile, most emotional thing you have to do. You're going in to sell a new program because you've got an idea that's going to return investment, get a good return on investment for the company, or you're asking for capital in order to eventually get a better return. When you go before your CEO or the board, you've got to focus, and you have to focus on not everything you know, because they don't want to know everything you know. You have to focus on what they need. So for instance, at CVS, and I think this is as good as an example as any, whenever I would try to get money for a program, I had to present the ROI. And the reason I needed the ROI was we were opening a new store every 19 hours back in those days. And we needed the capital in order to keep that juggernaut going. So if I went and asked for $100 million for something, I had to be able to prove concisely and with good numbers that I was going to get a return on it that was going to feed the beast here and keep money going into the program so that we could open more stores more quickly. When you're contributing to the company, that means that people are coming to you and saying, we need your help to continue our success. And that's kind of the reputation you want to have. You don't want to be the guy going in there with problems all the time. And you certainly don't want to go in there with a problem without a proposed solution.
Okay. Kevin, can you briefly touch on this, because you brought this up and I alluded to it? The thing that I would challenge everybody on this call, and by the way, I want to say thank you for those that put it in the chat and the Q&A. We're finding a mixed bag. I'm encouraged by the number of people that are sending out updates, but can you touch on this thing that you talked about in the webcast? The communication process doesn't happen overnight. You talked about it. It occurs over a sustained period of time. Can you address that?
Sure. I mean, every day you're in your job, you're building a reputation, either good or bad, hopefully good. And what you want to do is have people thinking that you do what you say you're going to do, and that you deliver the results that you promised. So if you go to the board or you go to your CEO and you say, I need X number of dollars because this is the next thing we're going to do, then they have to be confident that you're going to come back to them a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and tell them exactly what's going on. The question about communication, I worked for the president of the company, so I was meeting with him all the time. So I was not providing him necessarily with a written report, but he knew exactly what we were doing and he knew exactly where the money was coming and going.
Okay. John, let's circle back to you because I think Jeremy's your CEO. And, you know, you report to a chief supply chain officer, but you've had frequent interactions with Jeremy, especially during the crisis and this type of thing. Can you just, if you don't mind me mentioning this, and we're going to be transparent here and ask everyone, we'll keep this all confidential. Actually, it'll go out to the world. But you spend a lot of money with UPS. And you took Jeremy down to meet with the UPS executive team, including the CEO. Walk us through how that happened.
Well, I think it's really important for as far as I'm concerned that they're very important. Like our CEO, my boss, they're important people. They've got busy schedules. So when I want to make an ask of them to do something, I want it to be meaningful and really helping educate them on the way in as to what's the message we're trying to deliver. And we got the opportunity when the pandemic ended to actually get in front of Carol Tomei, the CEO of UPS. And we went in with a very strong message about the relationship, where we're at. And so that we get the chance to meet somebody at that level, that really sets the stage that at a later point when we want a favor or we want additional information, Jeremy can pick the phone up if he needs to and physically call, and she'll answer. During the pandemic, we had met with one of their other senior executives, and as we got into building a mask program, Jeremy physically picked the phone up, called Kate Gutman, the #1 salesperson for UPS. She picked up the phone, and we were in the operation of what we needed almost instantly. So being able to navigate and make sure that they have that peer-to-peer relationship is really important. And in my role, I'm a facilitator. It's because I'm providing them what I would like to have them talk about and how often I want to have them engaged.
Okay, so let's, Kevin brought up, the ROI and this type of thing. And I some of you may know, believe it or not, I'm a CPA. I worked for Price Waterhouse, and I know the definition of an auditor, somebody who walks around and stabs the wounded after the war is over. But one of the things that we found out on the pre-call webcast was, when Kevin's talking about ROI, and some of you may be scratching your head saying, Mike, I don't have a comfort level with that. There is something that came out of that discussion, and I want to go to Peter. And Peter, if you could talk about, now, folks, this is possible. Brace yourself, because what I'm going to say may be like impossible to believe. You can make the CFO your friend.
Mhm.
Let me repeat. You can make the CFO your friend, and Peter has done a fabulous job of doing that. It might be because he wears Irish green a lot like me at times, but Peter, talk to us about how you've made the CFO your friend. And if you could focus on that trip you made to Germany,
Sure.
I think that would be good.
And it's definitely a good career move as well. But we talk about going to the board and with ideas as well as investments. And as we all know, we're trying to fight the war of labor, and automation is a huge investment that we're making in the supply chain operation. So we had a huge ask, 8 figures that we were asking for investment. We put together the business case and the ROI, et cetera. But in order to really show the CFO what we were investing in, we actually took a trip over to see several vendors in Germany so we could actually see and touch the technology. And we had top-to-top meetings, and the comfort level and the understanding just increased substantially. So that when we had discussions about this further, he was in the know, and we didn't have to explain ourselves, and it wasn't contentious, so to speak. It was much more a partnership. So I highly encourage any type of investment, get with the finance folks early, in the process.
And what, Peter, would you say to those people that are saying, Peter, that's nice that you have that warm, fuzzy relationship with the CFO. You don't know the CFO at our company. He or she is not nearly like as Mr. Rogers-esque as yours. Talk about some of the things that you did to build that relationship.
Well, initially, there's a lot of pushback, whether it was the ROI calculation or the technology, et cetera. And basically, we got out of the office and we literally went to the floor. We literally got out and went to, a trade show. And, just as John said, people are very, very busy. And, him dealing with the operations, he doesn't have the agenda, but we set the time ahead of time. It was just for an hour, to have him understand things. So carve out the time, take him to lunch, build that relationship and tell him early and often. If you get him in early in the argument or in the business case, the better off you'll be.
I'm going to go to Bruce here in a minute, but Mark, could you just briefly touch, you've seen this and you brought up some stuff in the pre-webcast call about forging those relationships with those above and also in different areas. We focused on the CFO because, we follow the golden rule here at Transact, the person that has the gold rules, and typically that's going to be the CFO. But talk about the other outreach that you did to other C-level executives across the corporation.
Well, I think it's important to, as Kevin indicated earlier, that you have the best possible relationship you can with your direct report, right? So in Kevin's instance, he talked about reporting to the president. Many times you look for others around you that also can advocate on your behalf because they know through an alliance or a partnership or collaborative business relationship, interdepartmentally or across functions, that what you would advocate for would also help improve their business operations. And even if it wouldn't, they understand the full scope of the business. So it's really about gaining credibility in that way as well that can help carve the path out for you to move forward. Your stakeholders internally are very key. Those that you serve, you can't forget them and you can't go alone without them. So if you serve a certain part of the business, look, I remember advocating for a very large capital project a number of years ago. And although it had the word compliance in it, and it probably was an easy deal for the CEO of the company to say, sounds like a no-brainer during the capital review board, I was surrounded by a bunch of other people on that table that had deeper skin in the game, including the financial risk associated with what I proposed. So bringing them along is very, very critical. But I would say this, Mike, in this uncertain time that we remain in, which is very apparent, right? We have geopolitical influences. We still have the impacts potentially of human health. And as Peter and others already said on this call, there's things that you also have to be educating others on so you become the voice of credibility, because you don't want people outside the company knowing more about the issues you're facing that you're trying to solve than yourself. You have to be really, what I say, boned up. You have to really be current. And the credibility rests on your shoulders when you make a pitch for a major project or an initiative. As Kevin and others alluded to, when you're really managing up, you have to bring that along. And look, I'll tell you, I didn't always do it well. So sometimes those learnings can help, just based on experience, can help others avoid the same pitfalls or paths that I personally traversed down or others are traversing down as members. So these are critical components that I think are worth sharing.
Okay, folks, I'm going to hit the pause button just for a moment, and I hope you all can see what I'm about to share. You mentioned something, Mark, and I think this is critical. We focused on what to say. I've been a long-standing member of the Knit League, been honored to serve on the board and in other roles. And one of the reasons I love the league is every week we get the Knit League update here. And what does this do? It talks about the key issues for ocean, rail, truck. We have got you covered. And I would just say, for those of you that are doing quarterly updates, CSCMP also puts out some wonderful stuff. So getting this stuff is really easy. And I want to emphasize why, we're honored to participate with the league and CSCMP. And Bruce, I'm going to go back to you. As I mentioned, you were the chairman of the league. You meet with the CEO weekly, but talk also about the outreach that you've done with the, other executives within your organization.
Sure, Mike. Several people have brought up, the part that you gotta have credibility with the C-suite, and I think that's really, really enormous. You go to the board, you ask for CapEx, that's an easy thing to do. It's just a ROI sort of stuff. But as someone mentioned, you don't want to be going to the board and explaining why something happened and you didn't have a plan for it. So working with the other vice presidents, et cetera, around the company, you got to look at what's coming down the pike and be ready for it. So I think you just brought up a great example. Knit League is just great for me getting market trends, understanding what's going on out there, what's going on in DC on the Hill. That media helps out, and therefore you can look at some of the things and be prepared a lot better as to some of the things that's coming down the pike. I think Nancy and Ann do a great job of keeping us, no matter what mode you're in. And we ship truck, we ship rail, we ship intermodal. So it's very, very important that we understand what's going on out there. So that keeps not only me, but my whole team up to speed, so that we can make sure we don't have any uh-ohs that we got to go to the board and talk to.
Okay, so Kevin, I'm going to come to you now, and just let me share something I was going to mention early on in the intro, but I wanted to dive right in. There is one statement from an individual, not just one individual, but that I've heard repeatedly throughout my career. And, in the current, your organization where the president and CEO, you may be familiar with this. Some of the people on this call, maybe one, maybe more, might be a little bit frustrated over the fact that, and so they say, what I ought to do? I ought to quit my company now and come back and have them hire me as a consultant. Because if they hire me as a consultant, they'll pay me a lot more money and they'll listen to what I'm saying. And I know where all the bodies are buried in this graveyard. I could save this company a ton of money. And when I try and I'm thinking, I can't say it because they'll throw me out. I would suggest that I have a really good important tip for them. Take a resume building course, because they may be on their way out the door. Because like you said, Mark, if something's happening, the logical question is, why am I hearing it from the outside and not from the inside? How do you deal with those issues for the people on this call?
Okay, first of all, being a consultant is not nearly as glamorous as everybody thinks it is. And I got to be honest, before I became a consultant, I didn't even like consultants. So I would never advise somebody to quit their job and become a consultant. If you're in a good company, a Fortune 500 company especially, and you're on a solid footing, there's no reason to take that risk and move on, unless you just don't enjoy what you're doing. And by the way, if you don't like what you're doing, find something that you do enjoy what you're doing. So my advice would not be to become a consultant. I think that people can build their careers. I mean, I started unloading freight cars, Mike. So, it isn't like I started as a vice president in a company. I started unloading freight cars and worked my way up. It was a fantastic ride. And I finally got to the point one day where I said, I think I've accomplished what I can accomplish. And now I want to go try something else. So it was a lifestyle issue, not a career issue.
And let me just redirect a little bit, because I may have led you down a different path. It's not that I'm encouraging anyone to quit and become a consultant. There's enough of those. But the thing that I think generates that frustration is what we are talking about today. And that's the fact that they don't feel like their voice is being heard within the organization.
Okay, well,
so some of the things.
Yeah, let me reflect on that for a second, because anybody who's doing their job well and understands should be able to go then to their CEO, CFO, whoever they work for, and say, I understand we have a consultant that's going to try to do this. Let me explain, what I know within the company. We had consultants come into CVS, and honest to God, the CEO came to me one day and said, we have a consultant that said they're going to save X number of hundreds of millions of dollars on inbound freight. And I said, that's interesting. We only spend $80 million on inbound freight. How are we going to save hundreds of millions? And what it was a bogus presentation. Was going to get them in the door. They didn't get the job, thank goodness, and we went on to do great things. I want to really comment on something that Peter said before, though, and that's speaking the language to your CFO. My CFO did not understand supply chain. That's not a dig at him.
What?
He didn't really understand supply chain. But you know what he did understand? He understood the price of real estate. He understood the cost of labor. So when you're pitching something like an automation project, the fact that you can say we'll buy 1/3 of the real estate we would normally buy, we'll only have to hire 1/2 the number of people that we would have to hire. The CFO can understand that. Now you're talking his language.
And that's precisely the point that I really want people to think about. The communication rests on, one of the great motivational speakers, Zig Ziglar, said, you can get whatever you want if you help enough people get what they want. And, everybody in the organization wants to be successful. And I think it's crucial. I'm going to switch gears here a little bit because, know what happened, what's happening, being able to explain that. I've been asked, I did a podcast yesterday with Jeff Berman from Logistics Management Magazine. He was saying, Mike, let's talk about the black swans. I'm thinking black swans are no longer very rare. They may be the common bird of the supply chain. We have some potential black swans in the offing here. And I want to just briefly touch on that. And John, we have the potential for a UPS strike at the end of July. I don't know if anyone watched the interaction with the head of the Teamster Union before the Senate yesterday. I was thinking my worst nightmare might be having to sit across from Sean and negotiate a contract. We have some FedEx stuff. Bruce, we have rail safety issues now coming to the forefront. We have basically a lot of potential black swans. John, walk us through, and I'm going to go around individually to you. So think about that. How are you communicating the potential risk that these black swans represent for your organization?
Well, it started back with the rail potential strike and really being able to communicate up as to what is the likelihood, from my opinion, and represented by other, experts in the field, and then what's the potential, what's the impact to us, and do we have a solution that's going to lessen that impact to us with the West Coast labor. We rerouted freight from one side of the U.S. to bringing it in through the East Coast ports. With the UPS situation, we're communicating almost on a weekly basis what we're hearing from UPS senior executives and what we feel could be the potential impact to us. The one point also, Mike, that I thought was I wanted to mention was when you're communicating, you've got to be really careful that you're not using your industry vernacular so that they don't understand a TEU, an FEU, a blank sailing, and hundredweight. You've got to be able to break it down into what actually matters and how you can communicate that, the risk and the impact to it.
Okay, that's great stuff. Peter, talk about with David and all, he's your CEO, how you keep them apprised. You've got private fleet issues, you've got all sorts of opportunities. What are some of the things, aside from the updates, what are some of the other things that they need to know?
From a black swan perspective, our biggest challenge is really on avian influenza and the impact on turkey supply, because, obviously turkey goes into lunch meat. So inbound supply is certainly one that we have considered as a major threat. The other one is just warehouse capacity and consolidation in the marketplace. That has impacted us as well. So what we try to do is, understand what's happening with the vendors. And it's not just, asking them how they're performing, it's asking them how they're investing in their own business. Do they want to be in the grocery market or not? Do they want to be in the reefer market or not? Are they investing in automation as well? Are they looking at acquisitions or downsizing? All those things will impact how they service us, and we need to get ahead of the game. So understanding how your vendors are investing is key as well.
Okay, so I've got a question for the audience here, because I think what you're talking about, Peter, is basically what we've done numerous events with David Simpson-Levy, a very distinguished professor from MIT, on supply chain resilience, mapping your supply chain. stress testing your supply chain? So in essence, the question for folks in the audience there, if you want to go to chat and just say yes or no. A, have you mapped your supply chain? B, have you stress tested your supply chain? And that would be similar to what you're talking about, Peter, identifying what's really critical to your business, AKA supply of turkey.
Mhm.
And then B, going downstream into your vendors and suppliers.
Correct.
And the reason for that, we're finding some that have said, yes, thank you, Jim, and some of the others. But the reason for that, when Ford stress tested their supply chain, they found the part that could shut Ford down, according to David, was a 10-cent part. And the reason that never surfaced in their analysis before was because the aggregate spend with those suppliers wasn't big enough to warrant attention. But yet that was the part that could shut them down.
Mhm.
So, Bruce, let's go to you because we talked about this with the Norfolk and Southern issue, and the league has a great rail committee that in the ocean, everything about it. But talk to us about how you're keeping your PCA executive team apprised of the rail safety issues and its potential impact on your business.
Yeah, Mike, thanks to Ann, in one of her recent updates, she actually had a link in there for today with the Senate subcommittee. I actually had Alan Shaw there testifying along with the EPA, and they're talking about their safety bipartisan bill that they're trying to push through. So again, thanks to Ann, I was able to click on that and to listen to some of that. So it brings up, as we talked about the other day, from a black swan standpoint on rail, the liability questions that's everybody's going to be talking about, and where this thing goes. The other thing, from a black swan standpoint, Mike, on the rail side is, there may be a future merger here pretty quick with two of the big railroads, and what kind of service changes, et cetera, are going to happen with that. And so, we've been proactively working on some of those things. We talked about, the boxcar pool shrinking, and what are we proactively doing to protect ourselves to make sure we have boxcars in the future. And then the other piece I'd throw in there from a black swan standpoint is ransomware. We had one of our competitors basically get shut down from ransomware. So if we can't have an IT system, can we still move product? Can we still service our customers? So those are some of the things that we think about, talk about, and keep them apprised of, because sometimes you need some help in getting the what you need to solve those problems. So.
Okay, so Kevin, let me throw it into your lap here, because one of the things, you've seen it from both sides, the corporate side and now on the consultative side, as you're talking with companies about black swan events, or, one of the other things that's a mystery to me is how few companies actively engage in any kind of extensive scenario planning exercises around potential supply chain disruptions. So if you can talk, not just from what you've seen on the corporate side, but how from a consultative side, you're working to help companies avoid being surprised.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's something that everybody should be focused on. There is not a company out there that shouldn't do this type of scenario planning. And unfortunately, most people, when they think about it, they're thinking about the very worst case, cyber attack and ransomware that shuts you down entirely, or a tornado that turns your distribution center to dust and rubble. But it's much more than that. You should start with the little disruptions. What happens if the power goes out at a particular building on a certain day? How do you then take care of the customers from there? And work your way all the way from the left side of the continuum to the right side. So that's all the way from mild disruptions to dust and rubble, and figure out what would we do if this happened. This isn't something you do in a half an hour. This is something that takes months really to work through, but it's worthwhile to do it the first time. And after the first time, you can go back to that same documentation and work through it again and again and again. And you should. And by the way, if something bad happens, then when you get called before the board or you get called to the CEO's office, you can at least say, we anticipated this, and this is what we are going to do in order to mitigate the issue. And that's much better than being called in and said, what are you going to do? And saying, I don't know, we haven't figured that out.
Can I touch on this? Because I think one of the things that we talk about the supply chain spectrum. I mean, here at Transact, we've helped companies map their supply chain, stress test them. But the question we always like to ask, and I, over the last 18 months, gave a lot of different presentation to probably over 2,000 C-level executives. And, Mark, maybe you can start here. We ask them where they're at on the supply chain spectrum. First we ask, how important is your supply chain? And, I've written a lot of blogs for magazines and all, note to CEO. Every CEO tells me that having a good supply chain is really important, right? Everyone says it's critical to the success of the company. And then I ask them, okay, on a 5-point scale, with 5 being I have a world-class supply chain, 1 is a third world supply chain. African countries have a better supply chain than ours. Where do you fall? You're going to be surprised to hear about 80% of their supply chain CEOs and C-level executives rate their supply chains as a 3 or less. And I've always wondered, you say it's really important, but you're willing to live with an average to mediocre supply chain. Mark, how do we begin the dialogue here? And for those of you that have some questions, if you want to put in Q&A while we're going through this round, we'll work to get, we have some that sent them ahead of time. Mark, how do I get my people above me and my C-level executives committed to moving up the supply chain spectrum?
Mike, you realize you just asked for another 4 hours of webinar time here, right?
Well, you've got 4 seconds, so make it quick.
So on the spectrum of performance, I'll just say at a grassroots level, not every aspect of your supply chain needs to be at a 5, right? It may be that you can be 4 in some areas or even 3 based on your business model. Now, having said that, right. Because, scenario analysis, et cetera, there's a lot that goes into that. So having said that, though, 80% of CEOs saying 3 or less is not surprising in one instance. And that is, we all know the environment that we are crawling out of and still anticipating on the road ahead, that what's next? What pain am I going to face on Monday that I'm going to have to solve Tuesday? And then the next thing comes off, right? So outside of that, though, they should be wanting to pursue better. Not necessarily best in class. I think that gets in the way of better sometimes, right? So they do want to pursue better. And in regards to that is, I believe that CEOs should be looking at their company, their supply chains, with some degree of scrutiny to say, where are our vulnerabilities? What is our competitive position against our competition? And what do we need to reach in order to take ourselves to the next level? And this is an awakening and awareness. Look, 2.5 years ago when all this began, or 2 years ago when the COVID issues hit, and really back in 2018 when we were awakened to the fact that we can all of a sudden face a 25% cost of goods increase when we're dealing with China. It happened. So there's a lot of questions being asked around what is next? What do I need to anticipate? And do I have the people that can help me see around the corner so that I can make really impactful decisions to serve my clients or customers better? So it's a great question to ask, and it really is a multifaceted answer, which we can explore on a future webinar.
Webcast, okay. You bring up a great point. Not every part of my supply chain needs to be operating at a 5, but the ones that are critical to my success, it better be pretty good. John, talk about your moving up the supply chain spectrum, because you've been instrumental while you're now a vice president there at Sanmar in the supply chain transformation.
Well, again, I think so much of it comes down to even the communication aspect. One of the things that we've also put a lot of effort on is, as crazy as it sounds, I spend a lot of time with our head of sales and educating him on potential impacts that our customers are going to be asking about. And then does he have a talking point to answer to them? Or do our directors of sales have a talking point about what could potentially be happening that affects a delivery to a customer in the upcoming future, especially during peak season? We're working on some stuff with the UPS situation right now, and being able to make sure that they're well armed and ready to address those. And so, that's been really key from our aspect of that upward communication about the network and potential risks.
Interesting. Just very briefly, and Kevin, when we come up to you, you may want to touch on it. The National Association of Chain Drugstores used to have a logistics conference where they encourage bringing your salespeople, your sales VP to meet with the logistics. You know, it was kind of an interesting gig. Peter, talk to us about Landafrost, moving them up the supply chain spectrum, because you've done a wonderful job during your tenure there. Some of the key principles that have helped you do that.
Yeah, we really see, supply chain as a competitive advantage, and that's really what my organization brings to Landafrost. We're not out there making, the sales, but we will source, make, and deliver. The key thing is really, foundational with people, making sure that you've got, the right people in the right seats and you're giving them the career opportunities. Even maybe taking risk with some, high potential folks, putting them into a new area of expertise and giving them the experience. But not only is it the people, but it's also, making sure you've got the right partners in your supply chain. I mean, let's face it. I mean, CEOs and CFOs are reading Paul Page in the Wall Street Journal. They're understanding what's happening in logistics. And we just need to be the experts that people internally, come to. Moreover, we also really want to understand how our competitors are delivering to our customers as well. We always want to do better than the customer, than the competitors rather. So understanding, your competitors and how you're racing with them is critical as well, because we always want to beat the competition, right?
So just out of curiosity, in the Q&A and chat session, or the Q&A, the chat, the people on the call, we've got a couple, 160, whatever. And, just out of curiosity, does your company see its supply chain capabilities as a competitive advantage? Yes or no? Yes, no, or maybe. Good. Thank you, Joe. And some of the others that are coming in. Thank you, Diana. Absolutely. That's wonderful. That's why you're on this call. Bruce, maybe you could help. John, did you have a quick comment there?
I just one quick thing. I've talked about communicating risks. I also do a really strong job of communicating what have we done for you lately and how are we performing.
Woo! Like they say, if one of my buddies used to say, if you don't toot your own horn, they'll use it as a spittoon. So Bruce, maybe if you could help us briefly understand how Packaging Corporation's moved up the supply chain spectrum. I love the fact that you meet with your CEO weekly. That's just like unbelievable, but go ahead.
Sure, Mike. One of the things that I think, I've been in this job for almost 10 years, and, Doug got me involved with Knit League, and right away I saw the Knit League shipper of choice. So that was one of the first things we took on, was making sure that PCA was a shipper of choice. And that's pretty in ground right now across the area. And then along with everything else, it's all about relationships. I heard a couple of others talk about that too. So no matter what the carrier is, having a great relationship with them is key to making sure you're ready for the future. We didn't used to have our own trucking company. Now we have terminals across the whole United States. And that has really helped us, I think, to outshine our competition and bring the boxes to our customers right on time. And then lastly, probably about 2 years ago, Mike, we had shipping managers in our 95 box plants that made sure they got the trucking boxes to our customers on time. But left a lot of meat on the bone. And so now we have a group of professional supply chain people that are actually out there working with these shipping managers and doing things a lot smarter now than when. So it's boots on the ground and working with these individual plants to make sure we're doing it at a fair and decent market value as well.
But as you're saying, boots on the ground, I'm saying added cost, but what you were able to do is successfully sell the value of that cost to provide a better return, to take, like you said, the meat on the bone issue. Kevin, we got a couple more minutes. Some thoughts about moving up the spectrum and some of the keys there.
Yeah, the thoughts about moving up the spectrum have more to do with our original subject, though, which is how you deal with the board, how you deal with the CEO. And first of all, I want to give a shout out to the entire supply chain industry, because 3 years ago, half the people in this country had never heard the term supply chain. Then we started having, quote, supply chain issues. But I want to tell you something. We never had an issue. We kept moving PPEs, we moved groceries, we moved pharmaceuticals. The supply chain never stopped. People that had to do the job did the job. And so we lose sight of that fact, but people are now still saying, well, there's supply chain issues. When you're trying to explain this stuff to people, again, don't try to tell them everything you know about supply chain. They don't care about that. They're going to get confused. Have your facts and your figures ready. Don't exaggerate. Be willing to share opinions if asked, but really people aren't interested in your opinions. So don't make guesses. Tell them what you actually know. And if you don't know the answer to a question, tell them, I don't know, but I'll find out and I'll get back to you. Because that's part of how you build your reputation. The worst thing in the world you want to do in this business is to say, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, and then have it fall short. So that's
Okay.
me.
One final area, and then we have a couple of questions, but this one is key. An individual wrote in talking about supply chain leverage. We talked about it. Many of you said yes, and it's no surprise for the people on this call. You see your supply chain as a competitive advantage. Are you using your supply chain to get more business, build the business, increase profitability? John, up or down supply chain leverage? How are you using that?
Absolutely. We use it all the time. I got invited to actually attend the largest promotional industry show just to talk about what we're doing and the benefit to our customers.
Okay, Peter?
Absolutely. But I must say that the past 3 years have been a challenge, and we've been, set back a little bit, but we've got objectives and actions in place to return to really where we were, which was taking service off the table with our customers, making sure that, sales gets the order and it's delivered, without any issue. So we won't go back to world-class service.
Bruce, supply chain and leverage?
Absolutely. And we charge for it and they don't mind paying for it and we get business for it.
Boy, that's really succinct. Amen. Kevin, talk to me, with your customer, your clients and this type of thing, the supply chain leverage issue.
Well, let me tell this story. It's just a brief anecdote. When I first went to CVS, I met with the CEO the day before I started. I met him for breakfast and he didn't say hello. He said, how many warehouses do we need? And I said, how the hell do I know? I don't even know how many warehouses you have. The question you need to ask is, do you want to reduce the number of places where you hold inventory in order to reduce that investment in inventory? Or do you want to be more spread out so that you can get your product from your distribution to your stores quicker? That's the philosophy, and that's how you leverage supply chain. It's not necessarily by creating big programs. It's by figuring out where you make money, where you save money, and how you can translate that for your company.
You know what? That I don't know that it is possible to have a better close than that. Narc, I think you would agree. Nancy, I think you would agree as well. I would say one other thing, and I don't want to make this a commercial there and all type thing, but one of the things that I am going to suggest to you, I've been a member of these organizations for a long time, and the value isn't just the knowledge they impart, it's the network you have access to.
Absolutely.
And I'm honored that, I've known these individuals for quite some time. Perhaps you can, pick that up. I will just say one other thing. For those that are, know what to do when the board comes calling, you are not the Lone Ranger. And for those of you that think you're the Lone Ranger, I remind you, even the Lone Ranger had Tonto. And the reason, Mark, I love CSCMP, and Nancy knows this, the reason I love Knit League is because I have access to a lot of Tontos that are willing to help and just pick up the phone. You don't have to let your folks be blindsided. The information's out there. So with that thought in mind, I apologize to those of you that put some questions in. We had one about ESG and some other stuff, but I don't want to close on a depressing note. I'd rather close on a great note and say we're in the midst of a supply chain renaissance. It begins with communicating upwards. So folks, thank you for your time. And if there are things that you'd like to see us discuss in the future, please get back to us. Nancy, Mark, thank you for allowing us to partner with Knit League and CSCMP. And folks, we'll get back and Kevin, share information about the Center of Excellence. Okay? Thanks for your time, folks.